When you imagine the voice of God, what does God sound like? In entertainment, we have had plenty of examples. I think Liam Neeson's voice perfectly portrayed Aslan, who symbolizes God in the Narnia movies. But then there are those who think the deep baritone from James Earl Jones is much more godlike. And some who lean towards a feminine voice. Oprah Winfrey or Maya Angelou have these soothing, melodic voices. Throughout the years, there have been many who have played the role of God. John Huston, Charlton Heston, Whoopi Goldberg, Val Kilmer, even Alanis Morissette, and Groucho Marx. My favorites are George Burns and Morgan Freeman. Now, when you have in your mind what God's voice might sound like, what sort of tone is there? Is God's voice angry or impatient or businesslike? Is God's voice warm or groovy or parental? Is God's voice intimidating or inviting and tender? And how would we even be able to distinguish God's voice and be sure that it wasn't just voices in our head or someone trying to deceive us? And if we do somehow settle that it is God's voice we're hearing, can we even pay attention, or would we be so busy looking for the light or a new pair of pants? I suppose God maybe would have to repeat God's self a few times for us to listen to the message. I wonder what God's voice sounded like to Peter and James and John that day. What sort of tone there was. When we look at Luke's gospel today, it's important to recall 8 days earlier. It was just 8 days earlier that Peter confessed for the very first time out loud in front of people that he believed that Jesus was the Messiah, the Son of God. And then Jesus told all the disciples to keep that on the down low for now. And Jesus went on to tell them that the time would be coming soon when he would suffer and be killed and then rise again on the third day. And then it stops and we don't know what happens for 8 days. I suppose all of that was a lot to take in. Maybe they were sorting it out in their minds, processing those 8 days. And then 8 days later, Jesus decided he needed a break. He needed to get away. Some quiet time. I think we can all identify with that. And so he took just the inner circle of the inner circle, just Peter and James and John, up the mountain to pray. I'm guessing it wasn't a highly unusual thing for Jesus to want to go off and pray. But this time was different. This time, when Jesus began praying, he began to glow. Not just his face, the way Moses' face had glowed after he was in the presence of God, but his whole being, his clothes and everything. And then into this light, Moses and Elijah appear. And they start to have this conversation about Jesus' journey through the cross. And if I was there, I don't know about you, but I wouldn't have known what else would be happening, because I'd be running about halfway down the mountain by then. Or at least hiding behind a rock. This all sounds a little terrifying. But Peter didn't seem terrified. He seemed in awe. He wanted to freeze time. He wanted to have this moment stand still forever. Maybe to make sure that he and James and John weren't just dreaming. He wanted to commemorate the experience by building something. Maybe the way you and I would take a picture or make a plaque. This moment, this holy, sacred moment, revealed that Jesus was fulfilling the scriptures. That everything that Moses and Elijah and all the rest of the prophets had ever said or done was pointing right to Jesus. And then this cloud settles in on them, and they can't see and they can't escape. And out of the cloud comes a voice. I don't know if the voice sounded more like Whoopi Goldberg or George Burns. I'm not sure if it was instructive or if it was just loving. But there was no doubt that the voice was divine. And the voice confirmed everything that Peter had confessed those 8 days before. This is my son, my chosen. Listen to him. Now, with all the things we might imagine or expect that God would have to say to the disciples at that time, it wasn't a long to-do list of everything they needed to check off. It wasn't discussing past behavior that maybe they were hoping God would forget about anyway. And it wasn't even just explaining the way the world works. God summed it up in one sentence. And maybe that one sentence was all they needed, and maybe that one sentence is all we need. Listen to him. I think all of us, though, have so many times when we get distracted. When it can seem so much easier just to sit back and listen to somebody on the radio or TV telling us what they want us to hear. And their volume is turned up. And we tend to lean our ears towards those who share our own biases anyway. Those who tell us what we're already thinking and feed into our fears. Who to be afraid of, who to judge, who to exclude, who to blame. And then there's those others who would tell us how to be successful and to live the life we want. None of this sounds like Jesus, does it? Because we can forget about that cloud and that voice. And we forget to weigh these other voices against the voice that we know in our hearts. With all this noise, it is so hard to hear God's voice. How do we even know how to listen to Jesus? Well, I think we can start by looking at what Jesus did next. Jesus could have just stayed up high on that mountain where he was safe and secure, where it was holy and sacred and no one was going to bother him. That sounds tempting, doesn't it? But Jesus came down that mountain, and he entered chaos where his life was going to be at risk. And he helped a stranger in need. This is how we listen to Jesus. Jesus enters our world and loves us with an undeserved grace. And we listen. And we act upon it. Our listening takes form and we follow. And we leave our safe and secure little places and enter into the world and get our hands dirty serving others and welcoming all and loving even those who don't seem to deserve it. And that's how we let our light shine, so that Christ can glow through us. And we are transfigured. And others can hear God's voice through our actions.